Hi friends, Amelia here from Sybil's Lab of Cartomantics by myself today to have a little conversation about two of my loves, which are tarot, of course, and poetry, and the marriage of those two things and how I go about that. So, just quick background, poetry has been a lifelong love of mine, even longer than tarot. It goes all the way back to my first collection of Shel Silverstein that I had as a child. I have always loved poetry. I mean, the Shel Silverstein kind of grew into, Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman and all of the good stuff. I even read Chaucer in the sixth grade. I mean, I just have always I've always loved the form of verse and what it can do. I love language and I love playing with language, and I think poetry really does that in an impactful way. So why poetry and tarot? Like, how do they fit together? Why is that something that I'm even inclined to put together? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that my love of literature extends beyond poetry. And I guess I should also say a disclaimer that I am not a scholar. My area of expertise is in theater. That's what I studied. That's what I teach. There is some overlap there between, especially like the form of verse and, especially some of the classic playwrights. Shakespeare comes to mind. But I'm not a scholar of literature or of poetry specifically. But I do love it. I love reading, and I love reading all things of the written word. So prose, poetry, everything in between. But I love poetry specifically, and I think it kind of differentiates between prose or fiction, is because I believe, and the way I engage with poetry is that it reflects back something of the truth to us. It's not an escapist world, or that's not what I go to poetry for. And I think that's what tarot is. Like, tarot is a reflection of the truth. And so I think in this way they work really well together. They're all about kind of holding up a mirror to the world for us. The second is that poetry, I think, really leans into speaking in a symbolic language. Not always, of course, but oftentimes it does. You may read something and it sounds really straightforward, but there's always something underneath the surface, right? And definitely tarot is a symbolic language. We just put out a video about what is tarot, so take a look at that. And we talk about the language and the symbolic nature of tarot. And so I think in that way, they're just well suited to each other, and their symbolism and their metaphor can really speak to each other between poetry and tarot. And finally, I love poetry because it asks us to fill in the gaps. I am a very verbal person. I like talking a lot, and I could talk for hours on the same subject, just kind of like cycling and circling and spiraling around it. But poetry doesn't always, and oftentimes does not do that. It doesn't allow space for that. It really pulls itself back and only says what is necessary, and oftentimes doesn't say everything. And so it asks us, the reader, to fill in the gaps. And tarot is the same way. It's not going to give us everything in the answer. It's going to kind of open the door slightly for us, and it's up to us to step in and really explore what's happening in between, right? We have to do the work when it comes to poetry and to tarot. And so I think in this way, they can really fill in each other's gaps, as well as, take us on a journey together. So this is kind of, I have had a practice of engaging with poetry and tarot for a really long time. Um, uh, my relationship to reading poetry is often to do like a close reading of it. So like reading and rereading and making notes and drawing pictures in the margins and arrows and all of that good stuff. And just somewhere along the line, or along the way, I started incorporating tarot into that. And so I wanted to share 3 practices of mine that I use to engage with poetry and tarot. So the first practice is to use a poem as a prompt. And it doesn't even have to be an entire poem. It could be part of a poem. So like, this is a good example. This is one of my favorite books. It's Her Strange Angels by Sarah LaRosa. A book of invocations, beauty words, and divine presence. And sometimes I'll even just like bibliomancy this, and I'll just, flip to a page and put my finger down, and whatever that verse is that I'm pointing at, I'll read it, and then I'll reread it, maybe a 3rd time, read it again. And from that, I will form a question for tarot. So this is, we might remain in the familiar alleyways, the already trod smooth paths, and never push into the next sacred spaces that so eagerly await our arrival. So already I'm like, okay, I can see this becoming, what familiar alleyway am I remaining in? And what sacred space is waiting for me to arrive? So, and then maybe pull a card in the middle. So like, what can push me into that sacred space, right? Like, how can I bridge the gap there? So that's one way that I engage with poetry and tarot, and that's just to use it as a prompt. The second way that I would use it is to write poetry with tarot. So you can do this several different ways. I love a good haiku because it is, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it is 3 lines. So if you're unfamiliar with the structure of a haiku, typically speaking, and there are many ways to go about writing haiku, but typically speaking, it is going to be 3 lines. It's going to be very simple. It often follows the structure where the first line will have 5 syllables, the second 7 syllables, and the third back to 5 syllables. And some people will say that you need some kind of like a break or something where a sudden shift within. But this is a practice for yourself, so you can throw all rules out the window, and I often do when you are engaging with the marriage of these 2 artistic forms. So all you would need to do for that is, I like to pull a card. If I'm going to write a haiku, I would like to pull 1 card for each line. So you've got yourself a 3-card draw already. So we pull card 1, and then we pull card 2, write a verse, and then we pull card 3 and write a verse. And it's that simple. You can write as many verses as you like. You can also write an entire poem based off of a 3-card pull. And again, this doesn't have to be beautiful poetry. This doesn't have to be presentation-worthy poetry. Nobody has to see it except for you. This is really just about building an engagement with the cards that goes beyond kind of what we think we know about them, right? So how can I use, my understanding of language and my understanding of this card to come up with an answer, or to come up with a story that they can tell together? What sort of truth can these 3 cards, or however many cards, reflect back to me? And how can I express that in a way that honors and makes space for that truth? And what it's going on here is we're really building the muscle for engaging with the cards and choosing our language carefully in how we talk about those cards. We don't always have to be as studied and careful about how we talk about cards. That's not kind of what I'm saying here. It's more just about giving our mind the space to engage with what we're seeing in a way that connects us to something deeper, like connects us to some sort of like bigger truth out there. I hope I'm making sense with that. Like, here's like the funny thing about poetry is that it's so hard to, and cards, like it's so hard to talk about because there's so much about this that is like ephemeral. It doesn't, it's not real until you put it down in writing and like right in front of you, and so it's hard to kind of like grasp your words around it and really express it. But I hope that like that is at least coming across. So, my second kind of way that I engage with poetry is to use it to write poetry, and to use it to kind of tap into and reflect back the truth that I'm getting and seeing from the cards. Yeah. So my third kind of practice is to not even use cards at all, like put those aside, but to get into a book of poetry, like really engage with a book or a collection. I recommend for this type of work finding a poet that you really like. So like this is Blue Horses by Mary Oliver, a well-loved poet of our time. And reading through each poem again and again and again, and looking for tarot in the words that you are seeing. So where's a good example, actually? So this is one of my favorite poets. This is Diane Ackerman. This is her collection called I Praise My Destroyer. And I have in here, like, where am I going right here? Wrong side. Okay. So I have in here, like, something in this poem when I read it at some point reminded me of the moon card. So I just write the moon in the margin. I'm a big destroyer of books. I love to write all over my books. But if you are someone who does not like to write in your books, you don't have to, or if it's a library book or something like that, you don't have to. You can either like put a Post-it note in, or you could copy the verse down in a journal and write what card that reminds you of. So this is about kind of taking our knowledge and our kind of learning of tarot out with us into our, how we engage with other things. So as you are reading your favorite poet, or even a collection, like an anthology of poems by different poets, look for the cards and write it down, like make note of it, whether you like put a note in your phone or your journal or wherever. And when you come back to that card later on, that's going to be there. That line of verse, that text is going to be there, and it's going to add a more layered meaning to that card for you. And you're going to like build this beautiful library of beautiful words for all of the cards that you have that are in our decks, and we can pull that into readings that we do with our cards. So this is about just like adding to our grimoire of sorts of our tarot meanings and our tarot associations. So that was my third and final practice for engaging with poetry and tarot. Kind of like a halfie is if you're reading poetry and you have a question about something and you're like, I don't think I understand this. Use the cards, pull them out, see what they have to say about a line or a verse or an entire poem maybe that you are having difficulty understanding. I do this with literature too. If I'm reading a book and I'm like, I don't think I know what's going on here, I'll pull out my cards and I'll engage with that text in that way. They're a great way to clarify things for ourselves. And it's not just the life that we live, but it could be something like words that we're reading. Okay, so I just want to make like some recommendations here. So obviously Mary Oliver, we love Mary Oliver. This is her collection, Blue Horses. Diane Ackerman is one of my favorite poets and nature writers. This is my favorite collection of hers. I Praise My Destroyer, but also, what is it, The Jaguar of Sweet Laughter? Can't remember. I have it over there. That's another great one as well. Sarah LaRosa's Strange Angels. And if you're like, I have no idea how, like, where to even begin with poetry. One of the things I really recommend, honestly, is like go to whatever used bookstore you have available to you, and pick up. Oop, that fell out. Pick up an anthology of poets. So this is like 6 centuries of great poetry. This is not my favorite, not one that I would really recommend. It's mostly Western and like European poetry written by men, which there's nothing wrong with at all. But, you know, I think it's a little narrow. But, you know, this is, what is it? The Voice That Is Great Within Us, American Poetry of the 20th Century. These are all American poets from the 20th century. There's some great stuff in here. There's also some stuff I don't like in here. But engaging in an anthology like that really will give you a sense of like what you do and don't like, so you can go seek out more from specific poets, or you can even look at poets that are maybe similar to ones that you find that you really like from anthologies. And then just like go forth, like go wander the aisles of your bookstore or your library, and pick up what looks interesting. You can also go to, I think it's Poetry Foundation. I'll link them below, where you can subscribe to, I can't remember if it's a daily or a weekly poem, but you can have one emailed to you. And there's like, you don't even have to search for it. Think of that as like your bibliomancy. So whatever you get sent, that's what you're going to engage with and use your cards in tandem with, to understand, to dig deeper, to add layered meanings, all of that good, juicy stuff. And then as for like decks that are great for working with poetry, really and truly, anything is a great deck for working with poetry, but I particularly love to work with decks that are a little bit more abstract. So like the Tarot de Marseille is a great option for this. This is the Robledo. It's beautiful. It fits really nicely in my hand, but you know, because this isn't this is more suggestive than something that is narrative, like the Rider-Waite Smith, or even, you know, like the esoteric Golden Dawn tarots. I find that it works really well with poetry, both writing poetry as well as engaging with poems that I'm reading, because there's elasticity there. There's flexibility in the cards. But another great option would be something like, if I can find my box top, something like I think it's the K Tarot Love. This is a really beautiful, let me do this way, a beautiful deck of abstract paintings that are just excellent for something like this work, because again, there's elasticity there. There's room for your mind and your imagination to wander within these cards. I find that stuff like this is really excellent for engaging with poetry because it feels poetic. It doesn't feel like it is here to tell me everything in a really straightforward way. And if you have decks like these and you're like, that are a little bit more on the more abstract side, and you're like, I don't really know what to do with these, these are great practices to do with these decks, and you'll get to know them a lot better in this way. You know, you will become a better reader both of poetry and tarot. It's a really reciprocal relationship by engaging the two together. Other decks that I don't have on hand with me right now that are great for this type of work, again, like more in the abstract realm, things like Margareta Peterson, Remembering the Sweet Fool. If you have that deck, I know she just reprinted it. So that's a great deck. The Claire Max decks, the Rain Shadow Tarot, I believe it's called. That's a great deck to work with as well. But really and truly, anything that speaks to your soul, anything that feels like it speaks to that same part of you that poetry also speaks to, that's the deck to use, right? But anyway, that is just my really kind of quick, I hope, ramble about my love of poetry and how I use it to engage with tarot in a different way, and how I use tarot to engage with poetic verse. So I'll leave us with a little reading. Let's actually pull out the K Tarot. Of course, I just put it away. Okay. And let's do a little bit of tarot and poetry together, shall we? Actually, let's do this. Okay, so this is going to be from The House of Belonging by David Whyte. He's another great poet. You should follow him on Instagram. This is called The Journey. So, above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again, painting their black silhouettes on an open sky. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that first bright and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. Sometimes, with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You are not leaving. Even as the light fades quickly now, you are arriving. So I'm going to use that as a prompt to ask the question. I'm going to pull two cards. I'm going to pull one card for what and where are we leaving right now? And where are we arriving? So where are we leaving and where are we arriving? I'm going to use the K Tarot. So the card we pulled for where we are leaving is the Nine of Wands here. And the card we pulled for where we are arriving is the Ace of Pentacles here. So it's so interesting. All right, okay. So this is where it gets really fun to work with these really abstract decks. So like right now I am seeing this formation, this like circular form right here, and I'm seeing it reflected here. And like what becomes such a small corner of this picture is the focus right here in this one, right? And we have what looks here to be, I mean, this looks like a human figure to me. And they are walking towards this structure, this formation, away from, I don't know, something really big and tall and almost like imposing, right? So and like the difference kind of in between these two images here is that this structure, or this like circular formation here, has all of these like spikies running off of it. It feels untouchable, right? So what I'm kind of getting here from these is that what we are leaving is this sense and this feeling that the things that we want to like bring into our lives, the practices that we want to implement, the changes that we want to make, the life that we want to live, like the boots on the ground of everyday life that we want to live, it feels so untouchable. It feels like we can't get near it. And like there is something outside of ourselves that is kind of like lording over us, standing really tall, saying, you can't have that. You can't have a life that you want. You can't have a life that feels whole and complete and full of potential and possibility. That we are at the mercy of, this, whatever this is, this presence that is making us feel like we can't have and we don't deserve this, right? So like we're moving away from that and we're moving into a space that is simplified, a space that is focused on making it happen, on making those things that we want happen, making the life that we want to live a reality, implementing those practices that we want to engage in, planting those seeds so that we can grow the life that will feel full and satisfying and whole and welcoming to us, right? So like all of those spikes have been removed from this structure. What am I doing here? From this structure here, and we're moving into a space. We're being asked and invited to move into a space of a life that is free of that. That is welcoming and that is ready for us and feels warm. So yes, so that was a little reading for this week. If it resonates, take it. If it doesn't, well, then it doesn't. But I really enjoyed getting to talk about this with you. I know it was a bit like scattered and all over the place, but I hope you got something from it. Of course, you can find all of the information. I'll try to list the decks and books that I mentioned below. But if you have any questions at all, or if you have a way that you also engage in poetry and tarot, I would love to hear about that. I'm always down to talk about two of my favorite things together. But until next time, friends, I'll see you in the lab.